Welcome everybody to the virtual public meeting for the Fairfield County Land Management Ordinance update. My name is Jake Petrosky. I work with Stewart, a consultant firm that is helping the county out with this important project. Also, we have Carol Williamson here with Stewart. Cynthia, do you want to kind of introduce yourself and Joseph and welcome everybody?
Sure, yes. I'm Cynthia Williams, the Deputy County Administrator with Fairfield County. We've been working with Stewart on this land ordinance update probably since last fall when we originally started. And since then, we've got a new planning director, community development director, Mr. Joseph Toledo, who is also on, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, good evening. I'm Joseph Toledo, Director of Community Development, and been working with Stewart Group and Cynthia on new revisions to the ordinances of the county and everything. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. So, this is a really important project. Fairfield County is experiencing a lot of interest in development. A lot of the land management ordinances, it functions as your zoning code and subdivision standards, regulations. Hasn't been updated in quite a while. So with the potential for development, it's really important to look at your regulations, make sure that you're ready for development that may be coming, as we see a lot of communities on the I-77 corridor and experiencing more development pressure, with everything that's going on in Blythewood with Scout Motors, and we know that there's going to be more development in the county probably than there has been in the last 20 years. So it's really important that we take this time and update zoning standards and processes in order to kind of prepare for the future. So what I'm going to talk
Jake,
about
before I'll just add on top of that, because what you said is so true, and we've gotten a lot of questions to us about, is the county ready and what are we going to do to make sure that we grow in a smart way that doesn't have the county in a bad spot, and this is a key part of that. So I just want to, for the record, let everybody know that this is why we're doing this, is so that we can be ready for that growth. Thank you.
That's right. The update of the LMO is a process, right? Like it doesn't happen overnight. And we started it really, in last spring, summer. We revised a number of articles. We had a public meeting in the fall. We have a number of revised articles now available for review, and then we'll be moving into that public review phase and with adoption sometime in the summer. But there is a process for that too that I'll kind of go on and talk more about as later on the process. Yeah, a little bit of background: land management ordinance. We started in kind of the spring, late spring, and review and update the LMO. Really looking at strategic updates and content-oriented revisions. A lot of opportunity for simplification, modernization, and reorganization to where it was easy to follow, but had good standards in it. There was stakeholder meetings in August. We had a public meeting in September last fall, and the focus of revisions is really looking at your zoning districts, updating kind of standards for those districts. We talked about consolidation, but we're not really doing any consolidation, but we did want to consider that. Reviewing and revising the table of permitted uses. So within the LMO, there's a table that specifies what types of uses are permitted in each zoning district. So we did update that significantly. I'll talk about that. Reviewing and revising development standards for different types of uses. Looking at development review procedures and making some recommendations there. That's kind of going to be an ongoing process, but then, with any code that was written a number of years ago, and then there's been subsequent updates and amendments to the ordinance. In some cases, there was some redundant language and then even conflicting language to where one part of the ordinance could be interpreted this way, and then another part of the ordinance could be interpreted another way. So we're trying to clear some of that stuff up to where it's easier for applicants, for, if you're applying for rezoning or development approval, but also for staff and elected officials. So it's just, setting expectations, and it's clear for everybody. So, that's something that we're focused on. So, really, like I said, it was a strategic update. We're not updating every article, but we are updating a number of key articles. So Article 1, which is really the establishment and description of the zoning districts, and Article 2 is the district regulations themselves. Article 3 is conditional use regulations. So whereas uses are permitted in a district, these are conditional or supplemental standards for those uses. Article 4 is the appearance and greening regulations. And I'm going to talk about each of these articles in greater detail. So I'm just kind of giving you an overview. Article 6, off-street parking and loading. Article 7, the land development regulations, really the subdivision standards processes are in there. Now, Article 8 is kind of a catch-all, just general regulations for different situations and uses. And Article 11 is the definitions piece. So this is the zoning map for Fairfield County. You see there's a lot of kind of rural development in the RD district. You see the I-1 district, which is kind of the industrial development along I-77. There's some B2, which is business uses in some areas. RC is rural commercial in some areas. And then you can't see it, but the R1 is really located along Lake Wateree and a few other areas. So this is kind of the framework that we're working within. We're not recommending any large-scale rezoning, but we are doing some minor revisions to allowable uses and dimensional standards within the districts. So looking at kind of those districts, you have a lot of RD1 and RD, a fair amount of industrial, and then that B2 and R1 are the next ones in line. But this Article 2 really establishes regulations for the county, including permitted and conditional uses, parking, and dimensional requirements. We looked at the districts, including permitted uses and standards. We simplified some of the tables in terms of the dimensional requirements table and also permitted uses. Added a lot of clarity on cluster subdivision, conservation subdivisions. We moved some things that made sense to move. Parking was in Article 2 and Article 6. We moved everything related to parking to Article 6 to where it was clear. There was a couple districts in there, neighborhood conservation, stabilization overlay district, that was not used and not clearly defined. So we removed that one and just review and revise the overlay districts. There's design overlay districts in there that were on a lot of major corridors in the county. And we did some significant revisions to those to where they were only on certain corridors that made sense, and really divided them up into two districts. I'll talk about that in a minute. The new comprehensive plan that was recently adopted did make several recommendations for the zoning code, and that has a tie to the zoning code. Some of them are policy standards that are just general, and some actually do have a tie to the zoning code. One is just encouraging development, where to encourage development. So we got to think about these districts as a way to implement some of these policy recommendations. Reviewing buffering around residential land uses, and that is Article 4. And we did update kind of the buffering requirements in Article 4, and I'll talk about those. Land use categories and density. So we did look at the zoning districts and density, allowable density in those areas. talked about researching an overlay district for the scenic byway and gateway corridor, and that is what we did through the design overlay district. Is instead of having one general design overlay district that kind of managed development design on a number of corridors, we split those into two specific overlay districts. One for the scenic byway on 21, and then one for the gateway corridors on SD 34 between Ridgeway and Winsboro, and then also the Peach Road corridor. Another policy recommendation was promote infill and redevelopment, and we kind of thought through some of those things and how to allow some of that, encourage some of that, but also safeguard existing uses and existing residences and that sort of thing, and evaluate mix of uses, and we did do that as well. So this is a map of the revised design overlay districts. Before, the design overlay district included a lot of other corridors, including all of 321 and some other stretches of roadway. And it also covered 21 and tried to kind of specify some design requirements that were applicable in all these corridors. But in reality, there's two very different corridors here. There is the DOD 1, which is on SD 34 and Peach Road, which is really the gateway corridors into Winsboro and Ridgeway. We do have a lot of new development in those areas, some industrial or commercial businesses, but also some interest in residential as well. So the standards there are a little bit different than 21, which is that scenic byway corridor, and those design requirements really need to be different. So we did specify a difference between those two. District regulations. This was the old table of permitted uses. It had a lot of different kinds of uses, some of which were relevant and some of which were not, some of which were kind of duplicative and that sort of thing. So instead of having all these NAICS codes, which is really some are relevant, some are not, we kind of simplified those. The parking was also in this table, so we moved the parking to a separate table in Article 6, and then simplified the types of uses that are in this permitted use table. So here we have kind of a more simplified set of uses, a color-coded table of permitted uses, and then the supplemental standards that are in Article 3 are now referenced from this table of permitted uses. So hopefully, just from a user perspective, it'll be a little bit easier to be. And then in this one, the P's and the N's and the C's. So P is permitted, so you're permitted to have that use in that district. Conditional is you're conditionally permitted, so you have to meet supplemental standards in order to have that use in that district, and the supplemental standards are listed in Article 3. And then N is not allowed, so that type of use is not allowed in that district. So that's kind of a look at that table. If folks have questions about particular uses and what is allowed, or concerns over how do we do the supplemental standards, and we can certainly get into those. But this is meant to kind of provide an overview on some things. In district regulations, the dimensional requirements table was updated to be a little clearer. Some of the things, there was a footnote on stream buffers. Those stream buffer requirements just needed to be in Article 4. So we took the stream buffer reference out of the dimensional requirements and put it in Article 4 where it made sense. We reduced maximum density for the R2 district. You have a lot size that's a maximum lot size, but then you also have a maximum density cap for each zoning district, and that maximum density was meant to kick in when you do have a conservation design or some other kind of atypical condition. And the maximum density for the R2 district was 7 dwellings per acre, and that was kind of high, even with a conservation design for that district and the county. So that was reduced from 7 dwellings per acre to 4 dwellings per acre. So in a conservation design, you can have smaller lot sizes than the minimum lot size, but you still have to meet that maximum density requirement and not go over it. So that was meant to just kind of safeguard, the overall density in the county. Naturally, there's going to be some, maybe some proposals for more density, but maybe that needs to be annexed and go into Winsboro or something like that. Also thought about kind of the uses of these districts. So, B1 is meant to be commercial, and B2 are more commercial side, but then there was a RO, residential office district that's not used a lot, but that residential office district could be kind of a mixed-use district or a kind of medium or higher density residential category. It's not in place in a lot of places right now, so that would necessitate a rezoning. So if there is an opportunity for medium to higher density housing, then that applicant would need to get a rezoning to that RO district, and then it would be a legislative decision that would be evaluated by the Planning Commission and then the Board of Commissioners too. There's also a number of footnotes we just clarified here that wanted to make clear about duplexes and density and the RD district and height and that sort of thing. Article 3 has a number of conditional use regulations. So these are where you allow certain uses in some districts, but they have to meet standards. A lot of things need some extra site design criteria or some sort of buffering in order to kind of fit in a district or just fit in general in the county. We spent a lot of time revising conditional regulations for certain uses, things like mining and solar and wind energy conversion and limited event venues and tiny home villages and arts and manufacturing. There's a number of these uses that we kind of specified some supplemental standards for and kind of modernize the code a little bit in order to hopefully avoid some negative impacts and concerns and that sort of thing. So, hopefully.
Jake, I'm going to jump in because I just want to point out too that what you talked about with updating the densities and these standards for conditional uses, that a lot of these changes also came from feedback we received during those stakeholder and public meetings about things that we're knowing that are happening in the county or things that we know are some concerns of what subdivisions or tiny home villages or mining may look like. So we wanted to make sure we kind of addressed all of those things that we've gotten feedback from citizens on.
Right. So solar farm goes in. We want a happy sheep, but we also want happy neighbors. So that's what we want to do. Article 4. This is appearance and greening regulations. This has a buffer requirements in it. So frontage kind of buffers, but also buffers between different uses. So we specified where those are needed, between potentially conflicting uses. And then also different size requirements for buffers. And this is the smallest buffer yard here, just like a streetscape buffer that was really more of a aesthetic buffer than anything. But also, plant recommendation lists and some other things that were updated there to just kind of modernize the code, be realistic about, plantings, but also hopefully think about conflicting uses and getting out in front of those. Article 4 also had a stream buffer requirement, and this was a footnote in a table in Article 2, and we just made it its own section in Article 4. And we heard a lot about, buffers on Wateree and Monticello, and how do we, how are we honoring the existing buffers and setback requirements, and so we thought through that and hopefully made it more clear and standardized those for those lake buffers, but then also clearly established or made clear that there was needs to be buffers on streams as well. We are providing some flexibility there, allowing buffer averaging and certain conditional exceptions with approval from staff. But that is mainly meant to preserve water quality in the county with the potential for development pressure in the county. That's one of the biggest concerns from a natural resource perspective about development is once you take away those riparian buffers, the vegetated buffers near streams, then increased sediment loads and erosion and also nutrient loads into the river systems can have really detrimental impacts on aquatic ecosystems. So that's something that we wanted to get out in front of a little bit. And we looked at a lot of different counties, kind of neighboring counties and counties that are in different kind of phases of development. Richland County had a good one that we looked at and used some of those ideas here. Tree preservation, I think that this is something that was brought up a lot in the public meeting, and I do see a hand there, and we'll get to you, BT, in a minute, but I'm trying to get through these slides. We heard a lot about tree preservation during the public meeting, and that we need to preserve kind of our heritage trees and that sort of thing, but the ordinance wasn't really clear on when a tree survey was required and how to do tree preservation. So we clarified that. So tree surveys are required for parcels under 5 acres, but only partial surveys are required for greater than 5 acres in certain locations, like near the property line and near streams. And then there's some protection guidelines for significant trees now. So hopefully that's clear as well. Parking loading. This was moved from Article 2. We created a table for off-street parking requirements, revised minimum standards, reduced requirements for many types of non-residential. We don't want parking lots that are not used. That has a negative impact on cost, for one, for doing business in the county, but also water quality and other things. So we want to right-size parking requirements. And we clarified the calculation of it, paving requirements, and also parking related to recreational vehicles and stuff like that. When you can have a certain number of them when additional standards are required. Land development regulations, we looked at site design standards, dead-end streets, street types, when curb and gutters required, when sidewalks are required, access management, provided guidance for on-street parking, medians, cross-access, and connectivity, and when we can have different cross-sections there. One of the things that is important is connected developments. We don't want a bunch of dead-end roads that all go out onto the highway, because that can lead to increased crashes and increased costs for emergency vehicle response and those sorts of things. So connected streets requiring stub outs and requiring cross access to parcels is something that we recommended in here. One of the things we heard in the public meeting was about natural resource preservation and encouraging conservation design, which it clusters development away from sensitive natural resources. So conventional development is shown in the top right. This is where you kind of lot out the land and grade everything and serve it with streets. And there's very little open space. There might have some open space preservation where there's floodplain or wetlands or regulated streams or something like that. But in general, there's not a lot of preservation of open space. Conservation subdivision takes the same number of units in most cases, but clusters them away from sensitive resources. So you get a incentive that you can have smaller lots, so that sort of thing, but you also have to meet design standards. And on-site inventory maps required in the new ordinance. You have to meet 40% open space, minimum width requirements, upland open space requirements, tree preservation, and some other things that are important to reduce the overall impact and improve the design of those subdivisions. And this is just again a tie to your future land use map. You have some areas that are natural conservation and rural interface areas, and then low and medium density areas where conservation design should be encouraged with new development. Article 8, general and ancillary regulations. Accessory structures was something that we heard of some confusion about, and when they're allowed, and how big can they be, and what standards they need to meet. So we have new standards based on lot size and use, updated setbacks table, and more flexibility on location and structure size for larger properties. So if you have larger properties, you shouldn't necessarily have to meet the same accessory structure requirements that you have a smaller property, which with potentially more impacts on your neighbors. So naturally, HOA and covenants kind of trump anything we have in here, but we do have better base standards in the ordinance now for the county as a whole. Definitions, a lot of definitions need to be updated. Again, just trying to add clarity, define what is what in the ordinance, so the interpretation can be kind of more uniform, no matter who is doing the interpretation, whether it's Joe, or if Joe's out sick, then somebody else has to make the interpretation. 9 times out of 10, it should be the same interpretation. So that's what we're trying to do in the definition section. Next steps, public review is really kind of the kickoff here. We are going to record this presentation. It is going to be available on the website. Draft articles are available for review on the website as well, on the community development page. This presentation will likely be linked there, and then also on the YouTube channel of the county. Changes do require notification. So after public review, we'll get some feedback. We'll make some revisions and do the notification that is required. Planning Commission will have a chance to review, comment, and revise these draft articles, and then review and potential adoption by the county council is kind of that next step. So that's kind of the overview of the revisions. Naturally, there's a lot more detail that we could get into, and at this time we will kind of open it up for questions.